Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
Hello, darlings. Today I am bringing you a multi-part story, again by Lair. Michael has written this fabulous story on the Wild Hunt urban style. It will be in a few parts. We'll see how many I can get through at a time, but I do hope you'll enjoy an amazing story. I wasn't a dumbass like so many other punks my age. I'd managed to avoid juvie, though not foster parents. I had no say in the latter. I wasn't born into tragedy or a broken home, just normal folks who lived and worked in the big city. They also died in that city in an apartment fire, so the tragedy and broken home hadn't come until I was 11. Real shame, they were nice people, and no, I didn't have a hand in it. I was riding bikes down at the local park with some of my friends. We all hooped and yelled as the fire trucks and ambulances rolled by the playground. Then another group of them passed. Something big. One of my friends pointed towards the area where my home was, and at the black, billowing column of smoke that rose in the clear, early summer sky. The other buildings obscured a direct view, but the direction he pointed was about right for the apartment complex where I lived. I looked over my shoulder. Can't be. Close, but no way. Bet Mom and Dad have a great view, though. I tried to convince myself. After a short discussion, we decided to ride down to see for ourselves. Several of us lived at the same apartment complex, and we eyed one another in concern. One of the boys said excitedly, "Maybe it's the school." The rest of us cheered, but I already knew better. I had that sensation in my heart, sinking in my chest until it fluttered feebly rather than beat its normal solid rhythm. This was about to be the worst day of my life so far. But hey, I was only 11 and a half. Many years ahead, right? As we got closer, I tore out ahead of the rest, my legs pumping the pedals as hard as I could. The entire building was engulfed. There were several residents standing around, some in shock, some craning for a view into the dark orange flames and black, oh so black, smoke. I looked and called for my folks. When I didn't see them, I started to run towards the building, but one of our neighbors, an older man, Mr. Gosling, grabbed me. "Stop, Robbie. You can't do anything there but get hurt." I strained for a moment, but then collapsed back against him. Maybe they weren't inside. Maybe they'd gotten out, I thought desperately, looking for an escape from the horrid reality before my senses. Mr. Gosling patted my shoulder. "You're safe, Robbie. We'll have to wait and see. I'm sure your parents are safe, too. I'll wait with you. The rest of it's just stuff. It's lives that matter." I don't think I ever really thanked him for that. He was a nice old man, retired from the army, always polite to Mom. They weren't safe. No one who had been inside the building at 2:36 p.m. that day was. Some kind of gas leak. I never really cared to learn. I only know that it took my folks from me. The rest of that day, and many to follow, were a blur. As survivors, refugees, were put into a shelter. I was a juvenile, but with all the mess and it being late on a Saturday, Child Protective Services let Mr. Gosling take responsibility for me and help find my next of kin. The only ones I knew of was an aunt and uncle on Mom's side, her sister. Dad's folks were dead and he was an only child. Mom's lived across the country and we only heard from them on birthdays and holidays. So I ended up with Aunt Tabitha and Uncle James, at least for the summer. They decided that they just couldn't take care of a mopey, sometimes angry tween. And just after the funeral, my faraway grandparents had gone silent and remained far away and unreachable. So I entered the loving arms of the government by way of the good folks at CPS. I know, you expect me to relate horror stories of abusive foster parents and give excuses for why I turned out to be such a turd. Oh, poor me. I was put through an uncaring system and treated savagely. It's not my fault that I now steal and transport drugs. Nope, my parents were good people and raised me to pity victims rather than to want to be one. Besides, most of the fosters were okay, despite being involved with the government. I was the one who caused the problems. I did everything I could to keep each of them at a distance from day one. My stays usually lasted around 6 months. The ones that went longer had to do with CPS having to find fosters who were willing to take on a problem child. Most of them wanted the extra income that the state paid for being, as their advertisements claimed, caring foster parents for children in need. That didn't make them bad people, but I never stayed in a mansion or even a nice suburb. I didn't care. I didn't need anyone. I could take care of myself. I developed a detachment from possessing material goods once all of mine had been instantly destroyed. Yet I enjoyed the finer things and having them, at least temporarily, until I could find a direct buyer or a fence. I think that the loss of my personal property caused me to lose empathy regarding things. I didn't value property. Why should anyone else? That made it easier to steal. It was, after all, just stuff, as Mr. Gosling had said. It was hard at first to turn over items for a profit, but I learned. I also learned not to steal from fosters unless I was ready to kick rocks. I didn't get into dope or booze. I lived around enough rough neighborhoods to see what it did to people. However, I picked up some friends who were dealers and not adverse to teaching a juvie how to hold for them, and later to transport. By age 17, I still rode bikes, and I wasn't scared of much. Losing all the people for whom you truly care can free one from most fear. What's left? My life? What adolescent truly values his life? It's why the military hires teens. No decent sense of self-preservation. So I put mine at risk regularly. Transporting drugs was easier, less risky on a day-to-day basis, and more profitable than thievery. Not that I stopped stealing entirely. Sometimes an item was too nice and too easily obtained by the way of careless former owners to pass. All of the fosters eventually knew me as a thief and a liar, and the religious ones hammered at me about getting on the straight and narrow path or looking for the light. But none ever caught on to the drug smuggling for murderous gangsters. The dealers liked me. I was never curious as to what I carried or what business they might be doing. I dressed like any innocent kid. No tattoos, piercings, freaky hair, or anything that would draw official attention or adult ire. I had the good sense to ride safely, and I could lie like a rogue. Someone once told me I had innocent eyes. Whatever, as long as they helped me weasel out of trouble. So that's the general scoop. I was happy that I would soon be free of the foster care system and CPS. I was ready to close out the current last fosters, the Hearns, so I took some items from the lady's jewelry box. A big, gaudy wooden thing with carved curvy knots and vines interwoven all over the polished surface. Too bad I'd have to leave it in place. I knew a fence would pay well for that. It would resell as a storage box for some rich dude's personal stash of drugs or his little equalizer. While these Fosters hadn't been thumpers, they were still straight and narrow types when it came to moral, behavioral issues. She'd prattle on about being a responsible citizen. He hadn't said much, but I knew the look, the one that grown men gave me, a mix of pity, disgust, and contempt. I genuinely didn't care what they or anyone thought of me. Who were they to judge me? They claimed to be Roman Catholic, but I never saw them go to Mass, nor had they ever dragged me to church, for which I was grateful. I'd probably catch fire or something. I made good money as a courier between gangs and other crooks, though I'd decided that I wanted to look into other criminal activity, maybe cyber crimes. I had learned to fight on the street, and thanks to the philosophy of some of my Fosters, that martial arts would teach me discipline, I worked hard at it and became a very disciplined criminal. These days I carried a knife on me at all times, since being a courier could be dangerous. But I knew that robbing people or burglarizing homes was super high risk, and if I had to cut anybody, I'd be tracked down like a dog. So many choices, though. At just shy of 18 years, I knew that I'd absolutely had more wisdom than anybody else. Had to. So many had let me steal from them. I'd skated past the scrutiny of every adult until I chose to get caught. No Foster had ever turned me in to the authorities. I'd convinced them how sorry I was and how I'd make it up to them. I was looking at a great life ahead, right? They say that pride goeth before a fall. I wish it did. I'd have had something better to land on than the pavement. Thing is, I didn't fall. I was knocked off my bike and sprawled onto the pavement. I fell well. I'd done it many times, nothing worse than some road rash on my left forearm and a bruised left knee. What worried me was the ringing I heard in my ears, and the pain coming from my right side of my head. I was pretty sure the wet substance now sliding down around the side of my face was blood. Rotten bastard. Probably some dirty wine bottle. Thought I heard a clink. I shook off the shock and started to scramble to my feet, but no such luck. Whoomph! There went my wind, as a boot connected with my midsection. I rolled and managed to come up on my feet, though still bent forward and on wobbly legs. I tried to see what was happening, and I held up my hands in a feeble attempt to locate and fend off my attacker. Oh, dang, attackers. I saw another one approach from around the front of my bike. That momentary distraction saved me, though. As I turned towards the second, the first missed his swing at my jaw and connected instead with my shoulder. I lashed out in a side kick that caught his left knee and he went down. Not sure how I did that in my condition, but thank for the funk jitsu lessons, Fosters. Number 2 pushed me and I once again sprawled, this time on my butt, and this time I was able to roll away a few extra feet. Good thing he stepped forward with a knife in hand. I curled up as though I was scared. Okay, maybe I was a little. Instinct and all. He went for it, stepped closer and bent forward to get in a stick with the knife. I let him have it in the face with both feet. He went over backwards, and again I was rolling, then once more back on my feet. A little dizzy, but beginning to catch my breath. Number 1 had recovered and was reaching behind his back, very obviously for a weapon. I ran forward and planted my right knee in his gut as he pulled out a small pistol. I was able to catch hold of his wrist and pull it to my chest. I bent forward and twisted. Once his elbow locked, I stepped back and hammered it with my left fist. Snap went the joint. "Ugh! Went Pistol Pete. Thunk went the crappy pistol on the pavement. I pushed him to the ground where he curled around his injury, and I picked up his pistol. I started to point it at number 2, who had risen and was closing in with his knife. He was too close. I had no time to even raise it fully, but I pressed the trigger, and the loud crack of the pistol sounded as his blade sliced into my left forearm over the road rash. I managed not to scream, but that was only adrenaline and the clenching of my teeth. Made for a nice grunting growl, though. Sounded tough enough to me. I stepped back into the side as he advanced forward, but suddenly he collapsed. A bloodstain was growing too rapidly at the top of his right leg. I'd hit his femoral artery and broke his pelvis. All I knew was this situation was foobarred. Got that from some movie or trashy novel. Maybe Mr. Gosling? I looked more closely at my 2 new friends. Mr. Broken Arm, formerly Pistol Pete, had recovered enough to start screaming, "Oh, crap! Oh, F!" repeatedly and in that order. Bleeding Guy lay there, clutching at his groin and praying? I had to get the noise to stop. It would draw attention. People could dismiss a single gunshot, but a shot followed by screaming, some good citizen would call to get some 911 up in here. So I did the best thing I could think of and kicked a field goal with the screamer's face. It got him to stop yelling and gave me a moment to study the situation. I looked back at the bleeder. His head was back and the blood was starting to pool. So much blood. Then I recognized him. He was a member of one of the local gangs who called himself Aranya. He had a tattoo of a black widow spider on his neck. Guess he didn't know it was a female spider. That would mean that the other was Feo, ugly, since they constantly worked and hung out together. Feo was pretty ugly to start. Facial tats and piercings didn't help, nor had the kick I delivered improved his features. I casually pointed the pistol at his unsavory countenance and asked simply, "Why?" He leaned forward, clutching his arm, spit out a tooth. Ooh, that was going to get him a new sobriquet, and lisped, "You dead, mother. We was just going to give you a beatdown. You freaked up now. Now you're going to be dead." I just continued to gaze, and I flicked the muzzle of the pistol upward to encourage him to answer my questions. "Jaguar says your last load was light. You get a beatdown 'cause this is your first problem. And Sony and his crew gonna be dead. Now you dead too." Surprisingly, that's all the explanation I needed. Jaguar was the leader of Feo's branch of whatever trashy gang, and Sony was the leader of another trashy gang that supplied drugs and other criminal necessities to other gangs. I had delivered for Sony a few days past, and he or one of his thugs had hosed me when they hosed Jaguar. For that matter, Jaguar's turds may have hosed me. This was going to be bad for business. I didn't care if the gangs warred and killed one another, but that meant no regular business for a courier until it was straightened out, and the relative peace was restored. Money was the primary motivation for criminal gangs, but they had to have street cred. A non-fatal hit on Sony or dusting a few low-level associates would be enough to satisfy for what passed for honor and allow for a parlay as long as no one who mattered was dead. That's when I heard Aranye's death rattle. I'd heard one before when a Foster's elderly relative died while we visited her in the hospital. Far. I didn't even look. I just picked up my bike and flew. "Run, mother, you still gonna die," Feo screeched, lisping as I pedaled for my life. Literally, for my life. I pumped the pedals furiously and headed in the same direction I'd been going. I still had a delivery to make, and it was to a party that was linked to neither Jaguar nor Sony. I know it's crazy, but when things go sideways, some odd notions pop into the old melon. I rode as hard as I could. I thought about what to do. Get rid of the gun. Might be handy to have it for protection, but I didn't like risking gun charges. After the delivery, where should I go? Should I warn Sony and crew? I didn't like to get that involved, and I certainly didn't want to take sides. I'd lose all my business. What would I do about Aranye? Chances were that Jaguar's group would dispose of him unless they thought a gang funeral was in their best interests. I didn't have to worry too much that anyone would tell the police. They'd rather take care of it on their own. I should have off Feo and figured out a way to dump both bodies. I have had their junky old ride with the stereo system and super bright headlights that were worth more than the car itself to haul away their carcasses. Foobar. I'd likely have to blow town, but I needed to be clear of the Fosters and 18, so CPS didn't label me a runaway. Still a few weeks to go. I'd keep the gun for now, but I needed to check the load and condition. Likely Feo wouldn't have taken care of the thing. Just a glitch or two. All I had to do was stay alive and avoid Jaguar's punch for a while. Probably Sony's too, in case they wanted a scapegoat. Note to self, if I ever become a gang leader, pick a better handle than Jaguar or Sony. Maybe I could keep my current one. I made it to my delivery location and almost missed my contact in the dark, and at my still considerable speed. Elle looked at me oddly. "What's up, Coyote? You look like crap, dude." That's when I realized I was exhausted from my mad ride, and the sweat and blood on the side of my head must have looked pretty nasty. My arm must have looked even worse. No wonder no one else had accosted me. I probably looked frightening. Not cool. Blood would draw official interest. I grinned and took my payment. You know, Elle. I had to cut too close in front of a car and had to ditch. My bad, but I hurried over. Wanted to keep my customers happy. I knew that was a lame answer, but my mind was racing again. I was trying to settle down and concentrate, but now that he mentioned it, my head hurt. So did my arm. He let it pass as yo business. I thanked him for the payment and rode off in a new direction. I needed to change up my route. By now, Jaguar's crew would be on the hunt, no pun intended. He was named for the car, not the cat. Same as Sony was named for the stereos. Dumbass gang names. I was named for a cartoon character, which was cool. I rode to a nearby park. It was closed at night, but there were some public restrooms behind a feeble fence. I could fade this one. Any cop or security guard that spotted me, I could claim a serious call of nature. And face it, nobody likes to talk about taking a dump. I slithered through the hole in the fence that most good citizens would not have even noticed. Fortunately, the lock on the structure was already busted. Some hood rat may have already had the same bright idea, so I proceeded with caution. I was alone and took a little break to get cleaned up and do a preemptive strike on an actual call of nature. I took a look at the mirror. After I'd cleaned my wounds, I needed a change of shirt. Too much blood. I took off my outer, long sleeve, tore off the clean right sleeve, and ditched the bloody mess in the trash. Clean side showing, no one would look closely in this neighborhood, especially not a cleaning crew getting city pay. I was wearing a black wife beater underneath. Not great, but it would have to do until I could snag something better. I used the relatively clean sleeve to bandage my left forearm. Definitely not good. But until I could get something better. Crap. The reflection in the mirror showed a large, dark figure looming behind me. I stepped aside and turned to face him. It Whatever. Nothing. I looked around, still nothing, just a quick goose flesh-inducing chill and a slight shiver. No one in the stalls, and no one could have gotten out of the main door that quickly. Clearly my mind was playing tricks on me. I fled the facilities and resumed my ride. I knew of a thrift store nearby. There were donation bins on the side of the building. Maybe I could get a shirt or jacket or something. I didn't dare go into the local Wally World store. How many crooks get caught on camera? The dumbass ones. Nobody bothered to monitor the thrift store. I just had to hope that the local homeless population hadn't beaten me to the best pickings. Wow. I just realized I was competing with homeless people for resources. I would maybe need to reevaluate my life's calling. Definitely getting out of the drug courier business. At least in this town. Bingo! I found a faded but serviceable long-sleeve work shirt in the bin. Things were looking up again. As I donned my new apparel, I thought I saw something move inside the shadows cast by the bin from the parking lot lights that were amazingly working. Maybe a dog or a cat, but it had seemed bigger. There was definitely been scritching noises from claws on asphalt. I felt a cold shiver. I was giving myself the creeps for no reason. Sure, I'd kill someone and had a pack of gangsters after my blood. Gangsters known for their torture skills. Still, no reason to be freaked out. There were no large shadow figures on my trail. Just my rattled, wine bottle bashed brain playing tricks. I stopped at a nearby convenience store to get a drink and an energy bar. I thought I might also like to get some peroxide or rubbing alcohol to clean out the gash on my arm. Maybe even some gauze or something clean. The place had one of those bulletproofish glass cages around the counter. Some dude was sitting behind the glass, jabbering into an ancient cell phone. He gave me a glance and went back to his conversation. Just as well, no real scrutiny. I found what I needed and plopped everything on the counter. I had to hold up each item so he could scan them through the glass. He never really looked at me, just continued talking into the decrepit phone. Place smelled like someone had poured straight Fabuloso on the floor over fresh urine and didn't bother mopping. The stench burned my nostrils and made me a little nauseous. I started to leave through the single battered but working glass door. The other was locked tight and blocked with a rack of off-brand chips. All to stop grab-and-go thefts and slow down robbers for the too obvious security camera. I realized I'd been walking from a brightly lit interior into near darkness. There were stickers and advertisements plastered all over the glass, so I couldn't see outside. I paused to peer through the few open spaces on the none-too-clean glass. Just inky blackness. Weird, there should have been at least some lighting, and from the yellow-tinged pole light out front. I pushed hard on the door to clear a path if need be. I ended up stumbling out into the crumbling pavement of the sidewalk. I quickly looked in each direction. Nothing but the pole light and a bat chasing some insects near the bulb. Another shiver. It wasn't that cold outside, and the heavy work shirt was adequate for mid-September. But like earlier, this chill seemed to come up from my bones and radiate outward. Were my wounds already infected? What had been on Aranya's blade? Just regular crust, likely. Had he used it to cut drugs and failed to wipe it off when done? And I was just freaking out again? It had been a freaky night so far, and it was still early. I decided on a route back, home to the Fosters. I'd have to cross my original trail back through the Jaguar territory. But maybe they had other targets tonight. Maybe Sony. I took off and rode towards my last foster home. As I went, I noticed that the street lights were working, but almost no light came from the businesses and homes on either side of the street. Weird it wasn't late enough for people to go to bed, and besides, in this hood, nobody turned off outside lights. I had hoped to take as many alleyways as possible to avoid car traffic. Cars might hold angry gang turds. However, as I approached the first alleyway on my planned route, I saw it was dark. Too dark to risk. The left-hand detour around it was also dimly lit. The right-hand street was clear. No-brainer. I turned right. I'd just adjust a plan a little. Yet as I rode along, all of the streets and alleyways that would have led me back to the left and back on track were dark or obscured in some way. Junk cars, groups of random hood rats standing around burning trash cans, a couple of dumpsters. This was getting old. Up ahead there was a larger avenue. It was well lit, and I saw a few vehicles go by in either direction. No choice, I'd have to risk the bigger, busier roadway. The last alleyway I passed was full of what an old pulp novel I had read referred to as Stygian gloom. Pure darkness, like in a cavern. Were those eyes? Orange glowing eyes? I almost crashed into a parked garbage truck. Another chill. This one wouldn't shake, so I picked up the pace to warm myself with exercise and put some distance between the alleyway and my body. As I made it to the wider, more brightly lit street, MLK, I was finally able to turn left. I realized that there was a plastic convenience store bag dangling from my right wrist. It was banging against the bike and throwing off my balance just a little. I pulled into a covered bus stop with shadows on one end, but mostly illuminated by nearby streetlights. I took a much-needed seat and took care of my bod. Not that I tasted the empty calories I wolfed down. The bus stopped, and indeed the surrounding block was empty and silent. Cars went by at various speeds, but no one seemed to pay me any particular attention, just people going about their evening. I had found a small bottle of isopropyl alcohol at the store. I doused the wounds, and the cheap gauze bandage I'd procured, then wrapped and taped my arm. Stung like crazy, but it smelled good and made my arm feel warm. I used a little more to douse the cut on the side of my head. Just a pressure cut, but it was over a major goosebump lump that was painful to touch. I used the citrus-tasting energy drink to wash down a couple of painkillers, then gobbled up a candy bar to chase down the chips I'd already finished. The crap store hadn't any energy bars. Dump. Junk food aside, I was feeling pretty satisfied that I had handled my crisis and prepared to get back on the bike when I noticed that not only were there no people around, there was nothing living. No strays, no rats, no bats, not even any bugs, except for the sound of autos and the occasional thump, 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 thump from the bass on the stereos. Nothing. Then the chill came rising up from my bones once more, and the shadows began to deepen and seemed to expand towards me. I heard a vague and distant rumbling sound, almost like thunder in my ears. The only way that remained lit was the direction I'd intended to travel, so I hopped on the bike and began to pedal. Not insanely fast, but I quickly geared up to a good speed. MLK was a large thoroughfare that led to places where people worked for a living, so it was better maintained than most streets in the area. I cruised along until I was back near to where I'd run into Aranya and Feo. Then I saw it. The black SUV that crept along the cross street. The windows were dark tinted and the carriage was underlit in rotating colors. Jaguar's crew. I looked desperately for a place to ditch and hide. The ditch. I rolled my bike into the ditch alongside the roadway, laid it flat and stretched out prone beside it. The grass was damp and muddy, but it beat being spot by those animals. It certainly beat having old tires thrown over my still-breathing body and set on fire. I couldn't risk rising up to look around. I just lay there panting, whispering over and over, "Keep going, keep going, keep going." Naturally, they turned onto MLK and headed in my direction. Foobar. I ducked my head into the wet grass and stiffened. They drove by slowly, but no more so than they had been traveling on the cross street. They kept going. It was hard, but I waited. The block was the only nearby stretch. That was ditch rather than sidewalk. I needed them to get far enough away that they wouldn't look back. Hopefully they'd turn and I'd be out of their line of sight. Nope. Yet they kept going. Eventually I felt like I could safely get up and get going. Not far to go now. I hopped on and started pedaling. I knew I had to change roads in case the searchers turned back. Besides, I had to go a few more blocks to the west, my left, to get back to my foster's neighborhood. I started looking for a well-lit left turn off to MLK, but all the ways were either blacked out dark or blocked in some way. Then I caught a flash of light out of the corner of my eye. I looked over my shoulder. Foobar indeed. It was Feo's beater with the super bright headlights. I heard the engine roar and whoever was driving floored the gas pedal. Couldn't be Feo. The idiot had a broken arm. I had no choice. I had to get off the road. I turned into an alley that had been shrouded in darkness. Now a door opened on one side and enough light streamed out that I was able to ride full speed ahead. Feo's ride would not fit, but I didn't want to catch a bullet in the back. I rode until I found a cross street that was lit. What was going on with the lights in this town? I tore up the street, then followed the path of light, down several more twists and turns. All the while I tried to stay on narrow streets and alleys. I rode until I found a cross street that was lit. What was going on with the lights in this town? I tore up the street, then I followed the path of light down several more twists and turns. All the while I tried to stay on narrow streets and alleys. I could hear tires screeching several times as Feo, his new driver, the old one was dead, and I waltzed through that part of the city on our little game of cat and mouse. Unfortunately, I was the mouse. I dodged him again by fleeing into a narrow dark alley. This time there was no light, and I was sure I'd find a place to hide or run in a direction they couldn't see. I was feeling giddy and started to laugh when I slammed into the front driver's quarter panel of the black SUV. I went over the handlebars and slid across the hood. Oh, great! Hood rats really love their rides. Burning tires for me, I thought. At least sliding across the hood was better than slamming into pavement. I rolled off the hood onto the pavement and on the passenger side, mostly on my feet. I was momentarily confused. How had I managed to do that? Why wasn't I already dead? Hope there's a surveillance video. This would look great on social media, or news media if they whacked me on the spot. I steadied my stance and stood erect to see around, looking desperately for a place to run. Big Ray unfolded himself from the passenger side of the SUV, and Escorpion, Jaguar's main enforcer, leapt from the driver's seat, clearly infuriated. I'm fooked, I thought. These guys were full-on, badass, murder-for-hire gangsters. Then another door opened in another nearby wall, and light once more spilled forth. It was the back door to a restaurant. I bolted towards it. I ran past a tired employee who splashed garbage on me as we lightly collided. Fortunately, Big Ray was slow, in mind as well as body, so it took him a moment to register the situation, decide what to do, and act. Escorpion was not slow, but he had tripped over the remains of my bike and was even more pissed. Great. I was definitely going to be tortured and eventually murdered. Still, I did my best to delay the fate as I dodged into the kitchen. The faintly fishy smell of Asian cuisine nearly overwhelmed me as I dodged through the kitchen and slipped and slid along the wet floor. Big Ray wasn't so lucky. He slipped on the slick surface and fell. I looked back in time to see him catch his fall on his right hand, his gun hand. I knew it was his gun hand because it was filled with a gun. However, I could see the pain on his face as his arm gave way. Apparently 350 pounds coming down on a wrist joint may cause it to break. I didn't know whether to cheer or cry. Another broken bone on my tab with these guys. I almost took a wrong turn into a storage area, but an employee was in the way. He gawped at me, jaw hanging loose and hands fumbling with the items he carried. I slowed and carefully entered the dining area of the restaurant. I didn't want more attention, and I knew that a scorpion was unlikely to shoot me in the middle of a restaurant with 10 or 15 witnesses. At least that's what I hoped. As I passed the aquarium near the front entrance, wham, 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 wham! Bullets impacted the glass, and the water, and the poor fish burst out onto the floor. Better them than me, I thought, as I ducked and scampered around the front wall and out the front door. A scorpion hadn't needed to chase me into the dining area. He had simply stopped at the kitchen doorway and sent bullets to do his work. I ran out onto the sidewalk. The light was better to my right, so I took off in that direction. I didn't care where I was going, just away from the bullets and the murderous thugs. I expected either a scorpion or Feo to run over me at any moment. I took a few more turns and finally had to slow to catch my breath. I wasn't a runner. I saw a patch of darkness to my right and heard the rush of water. It was one of those pedestrian bridges over a drainage creek. Right direction. The lights on either side were out and the shadows were deep, but I needed to get out of the way of the hunters. A little darkness might be my friend. I crossed out onto the bridge and paused. I leaned on the rail, just catching my breath. As the harsh sounds of my own breathing faded back to normal, I heard a new sound from under the bridge. My first thought was druggie camp, but the sounds did not seem natural. A chill came into me and stayed in my bones. I heard wet, slathering noises coming from just over the edge of the rail. A heavy panting and intake of breath into enormous lungs. The drop-off was a good 12 or more feet to the water in the creek. Yet the head that rose in the darkness to gaze at me from just under the rail was clearly attached to a body that stood in the water. The heavy, slime-covered hand that reached over the rail from the darkness, the hand with the foot-long razor claws, was there to finish the job that Jaguar's turds were unable to do. I backed against the opposite rail as though those few feet would make a difference to this gargantuan beast. No place to flee. Freezing was out of the question. Fight. I had a knife. No. I had a gun. I had no time to curse myself for not checking the thing earlier. But it was now time to do or die. Fortunately, the monster was in no hurry, and although its blazing orange yellow lights reached to just below the rail, it had to awkwardly reach over the rail, like a small child reaching onto a counter to find a cookie. Huge, but not huge enough. Maybe short arms? Hard to tell with a blacker-than-black monster against a very dark background. Probably not too bright either, I thought smugly, as I pulled the pistol from my pocket. I pointed at the eyes and started blazing away at the thing. An actual troll from under a bridge. My mind insanely gibbered. I fired the 5 remaining rounds into the lump of a face. 6 rounds between those and the one that had taken out Aranya. The magazine would have held 13. Feo is truly a dumbass. I was out of rounds, and my sanity was soon too empty from my mind as the rounds had from the pistol. The hand had pulled back over the rail to shield what passed for a face on that thing. I flung the pistol over the rail, in between where the eyes of the beast had resided. I heard the wet slap as it struck, followed by a splash as the water absorbed and obscured that little piece of evidence. The sounds were probably in my imagination, as I was already at the far end of the bridge and beating feet towards the next working streetlight, my ears ringing from the gunshots. Again I slowed to a walk after a few more turns. The chill had finally faded. I was getting pretty worn. However, I'd figured out what to do. Stay on the path of light. Follow the brightest lights on the pathway home. When I did this, all was well. When I was tempted to look into the shadows, dark figures with fiery eyes stared hatred and menace towards me, and I caught the faint clatter of hooves and hard feet rapidly approaching. I may have even heard hounds baying. I followed the lights, and I was at the edge of my neighborhood, just a few blocks from home. Yeah, sure, the Fosters. The Hearns had given me a home, and I just started to appreciate that, for the first time in many years. Then the bright headlights blinded me, and the roar of a pair of engines sounded as Feo and a Scorpion closed in from a side street. I was in a brightly lit four-way intersection. Great! So close, but it would end here. No way to avoid the showdown. No torture, though, I decided as I pulled out my own knife, a long kitchen affair that I kept hidden in a leg sheath inside my pants leg. A Scorpion piled out quickly, Big Ray rather slowly as he gingerly cradled his right wrist in a makeshift sling. Odd to see such a big man display vulnerability. Feo had picked up a new partner. So much for his brother, Aranya. I couldn't recall this guy's name. He looked like a rat that had decided to walk upright, grown to 5'6", and joined a street gang, like Splinter from that mutant turtle show. Feo smiled hideously through the new gap in his teeth. I told you, you was gonna die. The Scorpion gritted through his still intact teeth that were grotesquely covered by a golden grill. You effed up my ride. I might have killed you quick, but now you're gonna pay. Big Ray just looked pained and serious, but he gripped his pistol in his left hand. Splinter didn't have any particular axe to grind. He was just along for the hate ride, but he pointed a Tech-9 vaguely in my direction. They lined up in the street like some freak show version of the Earps in an old Western movie. A Scorpion gritted out, in his best movie gunslinger voice, "You put down that knife, boy, and come with us. You can ride with me in the car you effed up. Big Ray may even let you sit on his lap." Feo gave what passed for a laugh with him. Splinter swallowed and gaped, and Big Ray looked confused and a little nervous. Then I saw that closing in faster than they were was the darkness. That Stygian gloom again, the rumble and thunder of hooves and hard feet, and the distant baying of hounds on the chase. The shadowed figures took form and writhed and raised arms and hands and claws in a nightmare throng that crowded in behind the crew of killers. It took a moment for Einstein, or Scorpion, to notice the changes. After a moment, just as he connected a synapsis and started to speak, his comrades finally registered the encroaching darkness and the figures within it. Again, like a movie, they all turned around in unison and peered into the frantic, dancing dark that was upon them. A dark made up of hunters from the realm of nightmares. Blazing eyes, razor claws, and rows of gnashing teeth. Heads crowned with antlers and horns. Hard feet and hooves, so many of each, came into focus, and sounds began to emerge from the maelstrom of inky figures. Grisly snapping and clashing, baying, snarling, howling, and a chittering laughter of pure devilish delight shattered the silence over Jaguar's unheroic crew of hunter-killers. They screamed in unison, and all three of them fired the weaponry they'd clutched. Feo had Araña's knife clutched in his good hand. He dropped it as his good hand fell limply to his side. I noticed a satisfying puddle form near his right boot. The screaming abruptly halted. The other sounds faded and then stopped, but the darkness did not dissipate. An enormous figure stepped forward. His head was crowned in antlers, yet he was clearly a man. The other beings huddled in behind him, each anthropomorphic in some way. The giant pointed at the gangsters, and his minions swarmed forward to shred the would-be hunters with the teeth, claws, and other appendages of the true hunters. When they were done, there was nothing but a few shreds of flesh and bone, and satisfied belches could be heard from some of the hunters and hounds. Then the antler-crowned hunter turned his head to face me. He rumbled in 1,000 voices and one. "Tonight, you were to be our prey. These mortal fools tried to take you in their own feeble version of the true hunt. I give you credit for making it past midnight. Since my pack has satisfied their hunger, you shall have respite until the next hunter's moon. Then at midnight, we shall resume this hunt and finish it. If you survive until dawn, you will be free." I had no idea how to reply. I didn't even know if he wanted a reply. Then I realized what I was seeing and hearing. Maybe all the pressure tonight had caused me to snap. Could be, like I thought earlier, some type of drug on the knife where someone had slipped to me. This had to be a hallucination. With that, the cacophony of hooves and hard feet and skittering claws began once more, and the darkness receded, to be replaced by a normal nightscape, with all the light pollution a city boy could want. I stood there astonished, and I'm sure gaping like a fool. After a while, I started to walk towards home, but stopped by another stop first, my stash. I took out the jewelry that belonged to the Fosters, Mr. and Mrs. Hearn. I stuffed it in my pocket and took it home, and sneaked in through the front door. Mrs. Hearn had left a dinner plate for me in the icebox. The next day, I surreptitiously returned the pieces to Mrs. Hearn's jewelry box. Over the next couple of weeks, I pretty much kept quiet and did some chores around the place. I avoided the streets and going into the nearby hood at all costs. I ran a few errands for the Hearns, mostly during the daytime. The gangs had likely returned to business as usual. The dent in the Jaguar's crew made him more interested in a peaceful solution. As a mere courier, I'd been forgotten in the mix. I made no attempt to remind them that I existed. Apparently someone had stolen or just taken back the SUV and beater to the front of the neighborhood. Then one evening in early October, Mrs. Hearn needed something from the store. It was only a few blocks, so I volunteered to go get it. "No, ma'am, I have some money. I'll get it for you." She smiled tightly and nodded, perhaps a hopeful look on her face. Hope that I had turned a corner. I'd come to realize that these people actually cared about me, for no reason other than I existed and was a guest in their home. I had to stomp down my initial cynical thought of suckers. It was after dark, but I didn't worry. The streets were well lit, at least on the path I needed to follow. I rode my new bike, a high-quality one I'd bought, to ride come the next full moon. When I got back, the little house was dark and silent, and I feared the worst. The monsters, shadow fiends or mortal ones, had decided to take me after all, and had maybe taken or harmed the Hearns first. I crept up the front steps as quietly as possible. I opened the front door. It was unlocked, which was unusual. Crap, they've already taken them, I thought fearfully as I stepped in and quickly stepped to one side of the door, crouched and prepared. A small group shouted, "Happy birthday!" As the lights came up, I nearly fainted. It was a surprise 18th birthday party. The Hearns and a few of their relatives and friends greeted me. Mr. Hearn took pity at the look on my face, swept me over to the punch bowl, and handed me a cup. I hadn't had a birthday party, one that I was ready to appreciate, since my folks died. I wasn't sure how to act, but I managed to get through the ordeal. I think I may even have had just a little fun. So now here I am, sitting in Centennial Park, one foot resting on my dark painted bike. The night is clear and the air is crisp, if not clean. The clock on my phone display indicates 23:59. I had a small backpack with me, just some things I'd need to keep up the pace for the hopefully long night ahead. I'd seriously considered just going down to the Army recruiter like Mr. Gosling had so many years previous. Maybe the hunt wouldn't follow me that far. Yet I had to see first. I had to know for sure that the hunters were just in my mind. Something else had surely happened that night a month ago. Maybe I'd outrun the turds and simply imagined the final confrontation. Maybe they'd caught me and I was in a coma dream. Maybe I'd just freaked out and lost my mind. Then I heard something in the distance. A rumble, and then a thunder of hooves and hard feet, and the baying of hounds coming towards me through the scant trees of the city park. Time to ride. So quoth this raven. A short insert here before the thank yous. My darlings, some days are just insane, especially when you're trying to record. I'm afraid the day I recorded this was one of those. It took me 6 hours to get 1 hour of audio recorded. So, you can get a short idea of why. If you listen after the outro, I've thrown in just a few bloopers for you. Thank you so much for joining me. I know Dr. Creepin had already done this one, but I just absolutely loved it. You know me. And the Wild Hunt is one of my favorite things. There is more to come in this story. Hopefully, I will bring it to you next week. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much for coming to visit in my little library on the chateau on the hill. And special thanks to my Patreon supporters, Ermin, Darren and Jennifer, Laura, Mutant Artificial Intelligence, and Tabby Cat. If you like this, please hit the little button to let me know. If you didn't, hit the little button to let me know. Leave a comment. I'm always glad to talk with you, my darlings. I'm open to suggestions and criticisms, critiques. If you have not subscribed, please do so and ring the little bell so you know when to come up and see me. And I will talk to you next time, my darlings. I ducked my head into the wet grass and stiffened. Are you comfortable now? Can I keep going? Are you comfy, Bone? Then the one that had taken out around. Yeah. I could hear tires screeching, so you can't have my lunch. Yes, I love you, silly cat. The old one was dead. Keep your tail off the mic. Ha! Bullets. Impacted. Bullets impacted. Nor torture. Inside my pants. Leg. You effed up my truck. Fail gave. They all turned around in Europe. Mr. Hearn took pity on my face. The clock on my phone. Excuse me. There is a noisy truck coming slowly down the street. I'm betting. What a pain in the butt. The frustrations of recording.